Get your coffee, wrap up your conversations, and let's get started. We have a wonderful program planned for you today, and we want to get through all of it before it's time for us to leave. So good morning and welcome to the September 2025 version of the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum. As you may have deduced, I am not Bill Bowling. For those of you who are not aware, Bill has received a cancer diagnosis and has been undergoing treatment for that. And he's in the loving care of his wife and lifelong partner, Hakika, and his and the rest of his family, of course. And he's recovering. And Bill is watching in on us today. So you all treat me well. Otherwise, he may not like it when he comes back. And we're fully expecting to be back with us. Bill, we know that you're watching. And just so you'll know how much we care, we have developed a get well card here that we're asking everybody to sign. So if you've not had a chance to sign it yet, we ask that you consider taking a few minutes to do so after the forum ends. And we're going to get that to Bill and Hakiki for them. And Bill, we of course wish you and are praying for you to have a speedy recovery. My name is Doug Hooker. I did not mention that. So by way of introduction, my name is Doug Hooker. And I have been asked by Bill and George to stand in today to moderate our program. I'm happy to do so. Before we get started with the actual program activities, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Dr. Larry Keating. Now, many of you in this room probably have met Larry Keating or know of Larry Keating, but for those of you who don't, Larry was a longtime Georgia Tech professor and a dedicated advocate for housing equity 35 years ago, before it was even a popular term outside of the housing ecosystem. Larry's scholarship and his activism helped shape a lot of what we understand about displacement, gentrification, and neighborhood change. And he was no stranger whatsoever. In fact, he was a dear friend to the Housing Forum and often brought his students to the conversations during the time he was teaching. Larry passed away last week, but his legacy lives on in the work so many of us can continue today. So please join me in a moment of reflection for Dr. Larry Keating. Thank you. And now on to the rest of our program for today. Before we begin, if this is your first time at the Atlanta Housing Forum, will you stand so we can welcome you, those who first-timers? Wonderful. All right, so all you experienced people, you look around, you see who the newbies are, and you be sure to welcome them. Don't razz them too badly, okay? Federal policy is shifting, we know that, and from HUD program budgets to LIHTC provisions, those changes are directly shaping how Metro Atlanta builds, preserves, and delivers housing, and most importantly, housing that is affordable and quality in nature. These shifts aren't abstract. They affect local housing authorities, nonprofits, service providers, developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, and families, most importantly. We'll hear how organizations are adapting, where gaps remain, and what's at stake for all of us in this community. We'll start with a national level policy update from Liz Osborne with Enterprise Community Partners. Liz is the Vice President of Policy for Enterprise Community Partners. And then we're going to move into having two panels. The first panel is going to focus on service impacts of these changes. And then the second panel is going to focus on development and financing. How will these changes affect our ability to produce more housing? And so to begin with, we're going to start with a video from Liz Osborne, who was unable to be with us in person today, to help ground our local conversation and to hear from her analysis of how things are shifting at the federal level. So, George, let's get that going.
Warren, the Vice President of Policy at Enterprise Community Partners. And I'm really happy to be here with you today to talk about the most significant developments this year in DC. There's a lot going on, and look ahead to how appropriations negotiations might play out as it's currently the field has been working on for a long time. And first and foremost, that is around the low-income housing tax credit. Reconciliation saw two big pieces around LIHTC, and that is that it will permanently increase the annual allocation of 9% housing credits by 12%. That permanent piece is tremendous. You tend to see kind of incremental increases in bills like this, and to have it be permanent is a big win. And then it also again permanently lowers the 50% threshold test for bond finance 4% credit properties to 25%. So this is a really important win for the affordable housing development field. It's estimated that these provisions will finance over 1 million new affordable rental units nationwide over the next decade, and then continue to do great work after that. Also in reconciliation, there were a couple other wins that I want to touch base on. One is around the New Markets Tax Credit Program. Again, something that the field has been advocating for a really long time is making New Markets Tax Credits permanent, and that was achieved. New Markets is now a permanent part of the tax code, and it also increased the annual allocation to $5 billion a year. So this is a win, 25 years in the making, and a big congratulations and thank you to everyone who picked up the phone and called their members of Congress to advocate for those two important housing wins. The last thing I'll mention on reconciliation is the work that happened around opportunity zones. There was a lot of opportunity zone content in one big, beautiful bill. Opportunity zones is now a permanent part of the tax code as well. It also keeps the 10-year redesignation period by governors intact. And I would note those conversations are happening now. So if you want to be influencing where opportunity zones are in your state, I would suggest making calls to your governor's office. And then it also increases incentives for investing in rural areas. We know that developing in rural communities presents its own unique challenges. And so I'm really pleased to have incentives to drive investment in rural communities across the country. And it has additional reporting requirements to make sure that the program is operating as Congress has intended. So those are the big things around reconciliation, particularly in terms of affordable housing. On the appropriation side, there tends to be a little bit of confusion around where we are in the process, frankly. And that is because the appropriation cycle gets kicked off when the president sends his appropriations or budget request to Congress. Obviously, we saw that earlier this year to a lot of press. And that is because it included some really drastic cuts to many housing and community development programs, including proposals to consolidate rental assistance and homelessness programs. I think it's very important to remember that the president's budget request is a non-binding document. And so it's really just messaging to the president's party what the White House would like to see. And then Congress gets to do its own thing and write the bills that they want. And I don't think we were at risk of seeing a lot of those things end up in final appropriations bills. And now that we've seen the final appropriations bills from both, or the draft appropriations bills from both the House and the Senate, we know that to be true, right? Neither appropriations legislation from either chamber includes the proposals to consolidate any programs. And the House bill included relatively flat funding levels for rental assistance programs and many other programs. The main issue, which we saw coming, is that the House THUD appropriations bill proposes eliminating funding for the home program, which is something that Enterprise advocates very strongly for. It is a tremendously flexible program that is really important to fund if you want to take advantage of those wins around LIHTC that you saw in reconciliation, because it's so frequently paired with the housing credit program and development deals. And so we're working really hard on appropriations advocacy around the home program. The justification we heard in the House is that they basically compared home to home ARP. And it's really important to note that those are actually completely different programs. They basically used the home kind of structure during COVID legislation to funnel spending dollars into mostly homelessness specific programs. And so they work very differently, and we're working hard to educate members and advocate for both the highest possible level of funding, but also just the difference between the two programs. As expected, the Senate numbers are generally better. It funded home at $1.2 billion. Vouchers, TBRA and PBRA were both at pretty significantly higher levels than you saw in the House, and we're hopeful that those would be enough to cover all renewals. And I guess the main question now is what happens next? The House and Senate both have their bills, but we're coming up quickly on that September 30th CR expiration. And we don't have a final package to be considering. And so really moving forward, the key debates that I'm watching for in Congress and are around appropriations, rescissions, and a banking bill that I'll talk about in a minute. But in terms of appropriations, because that's what's kind of on everyone's mind right now, there's basically three different options. You can have a full year spending bill passed by the end of September, which is tremendously unlikely. We haven't seen it in a long time. Or you can have some sort of continuing resolution that funds the government at current levels through whatever date Congress and the White House determine, or you can have a shutdown. And what we've been hearing is that the White House and Republicans are interested in a continuing resolution. The date is a little bit TBD. I think the White House would like a continuing resolution through the first quarter of 2026, so through March. Whereas some congressional Republicans are more interested in just kind of getting through the midterms and then coming back to negotiations around a longer term solution. So could be March, could be November, but actually what we're hearing at the moment is they still don't have the votes. They don't know if they have the votes, because you do need to pass it with 60 votes in the Senate. So you have to have Democrats on board, and you have to get all of your Republicans on the same page with such a slim margin in the House. So there's still a lot of conversations that need to happen there. One thing I'll lift up is that there have been some press around reconciliation that is shaping the Republicans' plans around a continuing resolution. There are some challenges with OBBA that Republicans would like to rebrand, and that's particularly around healthcare and SNAP, nutrition assistance program funding. So it's possible that you could see something included in a CR there. There's also frequently disaster recovery funds that are included in continuing resolutions. So that's part of the conversation that's happening. On the Democratic side, they're in a tough spot. Really, this is their only leverage that they have because reconciliation is a process that you can use without, you don't need the 60 votes in the Senate. You can pass bills with a simple majority. So Dems really had no power there. But this is the one place where they do have a little bit of leverage. People are looking to them to come out with some sort of victory. And I think a lot of the Democrats in Congress were frustrated with Leader Schumer's negotiations around the continuing resolution that we're currently operating under. They didn't feel like he got enough out of the deal and perhaps should have shut down the government. The problem is there's an additional concern that what happens if they do shut down the government and there's not a lot of incentive for the White House to reopen it, then you could have a really prolonged, protracted shutdown, which hurts everyone's constituents. So a lot kind of up in the air there. It's not unusual, but will be, I think things will kind of shift and come into focus as we get closer to the end of the month. Just the two other things to mention really briefly are pocket rescissions. This is where the White House sends a request to kind of claw back some funds to Congress, and they can pass it with a simple majority. You saw one bill passed already, and the White House has sent another one to the Hill. Some questions around whether or not you'd see one around housing. I don't anticipate seeing that. I think the most recent one around the State Department will be the last one that we see in this negotiation cycle, but again, TBD. And then maybe I'll end with a ray of hope, which is this really tremendous bipartisan bill that's come out of the Senate Banking Committee. It is really exciting to see Republicans and Democrats come together and work on such a comprehensive piece of housing authorizing legislation. I don't know that I've seen this in decades, frankly. And there's a lot of really great priorities included in it. It's got over 30 different individual pieces of legislation included in the bill. But just to name a couple, it has a rural piece of legislation that's aimed at ensuring rental assistance can still remain at rural properties after you pay off your 515 mortgages. It has disaster recovery legislation that would permanently authorize CDBG DR, getting disaster dollars out the door faster to communities that need it. It has some really great voucher streamlining and incentivizing pieces of legislation, and it has home reauthorization. So some really exciting things there. The House is working on that bill. I'm hopeful that Senate takes up the banking, the Road to Housing Act, the Scott Warren bill, and just a nice bright spot to end on. Thank you for having me today. I hope the rest of your conversations go well. On behalf of Enterprise Community Partners, I want to send our best wishes to Bill in his recovery.
So we are very grateful to Liz Osborne for offering us that national perspective. Liz is no stranger to the Housing Forum. She's actually been down here before, but was unable to join us today. So she agreed to send that video, and we appreciate that. So with that national context in mind, let's turn to our first panel, which we have entitled Service, Impacts, and Responses. And we're going to hear directly from local leaders about how these federal changes that Liz spoke about, how they're directing, how they're affecting housing authorities, service providers, and nonprofit agencies right here in our backyard. So please welcome our panelists. Please come up as I call your name, panelists. Carol Collard, the CEO of Caring Works, Melanie Kagan, the CEO of the Center for Family Resources, and Dwayne Vaughn, the COO of Atlanta Housing. We had a wonderful conversation in preparation for today's panel discussion, so I'm looking forward to hearing more this morning, and I think you will too. So this is a question for all of you. First of all, please start by reminding the audience of your organization and what its work is and your role in the organization. So we've heard service providers say demand is rising while resources are shrinking. What specific changes have you seen or are you projecting in the needs of the people you provide for or the number of people you provide services for this year and in the next year? So, Carol, would you like to start?
Good morning. Is this on? Great. Carol Collard, founder and CEO of Caring Works. And before I answer the question, I guess it would be useful to tell you a little bit about what we do. We are a provider of supportive housing and also behavioral health services. We have a little over 300 apartments that we provide to our clients across the metropolitan Atlanta area. And in addition to that, we have a 70-bed residential treatment facility called Hope House that is located in downtown Atlanta. In addition, we also provide outpatient behavioral health services that is largely Medicaid funded. That serves roughly about 1,000 people a year. In our housing, a little over 800 people a year. And those numbers mean something. We are obviously one of many nonprofit organizations that do supportive housing in the metropolitan Atlanta area. And we are all largely dependent on HUD funding. In fact, not to speak for other nonprofits, but Caring Works in particular, it's over 80% of our budget is federal, whether it's HUD or SAMHSA or some other entity. And so the changes that I will speak to has to do with the anxiety that our clients have been experiencing for the last 9 months, not knowing what the future holds for them. And not surprisingly, our staff being uncertain of what's to come. We have prided ourselves since we opened our doors on being able to adhere and embrace best practices. There are dictates or guidelines from HUD that talk about client to staff ratio, the types of services that you offer. There is an embracement philosophically of a practice called housing first, where you essentially housing, it's just like you would expect. Housing comes first, which preserves dignity of the people that we serve. And once people have a roof overhead, then we can address the health needs. And I should disclose from the outset that the clients that Caring Works serves primarily are individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And the definition for that is those individuals usually have an intersection of behavioral health challenges or chronic physical health challenges, and also have experienced homelessness or being unhoused for longer periods of time, a year or more, or multiple episodes over a period of years. And so these are individuals that are typically you might see at Woodruff Park under the bridge or something of that nature, who have now had an opportunity to get housed. Chronic health conditions are going to be rampant in this population. Obviously, as I shared, mental health challenges. And so those individuals are now listening to the news just as we are, and being concerned about what their future is going to be. And that poses its own challenges. What was referenced by Ms. Osborne in the video in terms of rescissions is a concern. the potential reductions in HUD funding. Are we going to get renewed? Will there be any opportunity for new programs? All of that creates anxiety within the nonprofit sector. And as we were discussing earlier this morning, there are challenges within the nonprofit sector about how we go on. So the philanthropic community and other stakeholders are now encouraging strategic partnerships and things of that nature for us to be able to survive.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Melanie.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Melanie Kagan. I'm the CEO for the Center for Family Resources. We are actually an agency that serves Cobb County, so a little north of your metro area. We act as a service provider, but are also the lead agency and collaborative applicant for our continuum of care that serves Cobb and Marietta, which means we apply to HUD for funding for the projects that serve our homeless population in Cobb. So we have sort of both lenses. I get to see it from both the 30,000-foot view of who's coming in seeking services and what our homeless population looks like out there, in addition to being a service provider to families with children. So that is our sweet spot, is families and children that are experiencing homelessness. We try to stabilize our kiddos, who are oftentimes collateral damage in the process, right? They're not making any decisions that lead to where they are. They just kind of get drugged through the process. So trying to really give them a different path and work with their parents to find stability. And that looks different for everybody. I say this a lot, but we're not making widgets in my office. We are dealing with humans and human behavior and human problems, and every single one of them looks a little different. But what we do is try to really customize what those responses are going to look like to get people to where they need to be. And it will look different. It looks different for you, and it looks different for me, and it looks different for them. And so that is kind of where we focus. We do everything from short-term shelter and housing to permanent rapid rehousing, and we have a ton of prevention programs and case management. Similar, we are about half and half, or about 50% funded by some type of government funding, and we fundraise or have contracts for the rest of it, which is a very difficult place to be when you're going into a budget cycle with absolutely no idea what your funding is going to look like. Some of our contracts with HUD start as soon as October. Lucky for me, that one was actually renewed, so we've got that one on lock. Yeah, thanks. Because they are coming through the continuum of care, we are supposed to be in a 2-year renewal. So we did the applications in September of 24. That right? Yeah. And received funding notices and contracts for the first year. Congress had approved a 2-year funding cycle, which we had advocated for a long time. Any of you who have ever been part of an application to any government entity, HUD or otherwise, knows that that is a huge undertaking. So it comes with a lot of paperwork. It comes with a lot of collaboration and a lot of data. And so doing it every year is very time consuming for staff. It takes about 2.5 to 3 months to actually prepare for those and get them filed. And so it feels like once you get the notices, you're turning around and basically prepping the next application. They're also about a year in advance, which is really difficult for strategy and planning, because I have to decide now what my funding is going to be used for in 18 months. So things change in 18 months, and I might want to do something different. I don't have a lot of wiggle room to do that. That's where our unrestricted funds come from. So that's a really big, important part of what nonprofits are looking at. Unfortunately, on the federal landscape, you also have a lot of, I don't want to use the term rhetoric because that sounds bad, but it is a little bit, that nonprofits somehow cannot be trusted now. There's been a lot of issue with nonprofits that take federal funds and whether or not that's legitimate. And in all cases, business and nonprofit and otherwise, there are always people who have ill intentions or are going to take advantage of a system. But a blanket statement that all of us are not operating well, or that we somehow cannot manage funds or should not be trusted, is really damaging, because when the federal government changes their funding shifts, usually what happens is our philanthropic and corporate partners can kind of fill in gaps, and they step up their support, which we love and which we are very thankful for, but that's how we operate. When you have trusted people saying the government's going to take away funding because we don't trust that they're using money well, and we don't think it's worth the investment. You have a lot of corporations that follow suit because they're listening to that. And so that's another challenge for us. On the need side, we are seeing increases to need, partly just because of economic uncertainty in general, and partly because some of these programs are already seeing some decreases. When you have uncertainty, a lot of times you have to pull back. For those of you who don't know, these are all reimbursement grants. So what that means is I have to outlay money and then request it after the fact. Most nonprofits do not have $100,000 sitting around. Most of us utilize lines of credit or other things, but when that cycle gets disrupted, we either get ourselves in a jam where we've maxed out a line of credit, or we just don't have the cash flow to continue a program. And the catch-22 is if you're not spending down your grant timely, then you won't use it in time, and then they do the recapture of funds. So it's a real fun dance that we do. So a lot of our service providers are starting to scale back just because they don't know what's going to come, and they cannot afford to expend dollars that they may not get reimbursed for. It's just not an option for most of us. And so that has been tough because we've got people who are being discharged from programs or service is ending and they weren't quite ready for that. We have seen an increase year to date, just in our office alone. On average, we take about 1,300 to 1,400 calls a month in our office, which is a lot. We've already seen an increase this year alone of 1,400 calls year to date. So we've already seen an uptick. We know that more people are looking for services. On the homeless side, we actually have had 51 more unique households enrolled this year than we did last year. And we see about 800 to 1,000 households in Cobb County. This is just Cobb County, that are actually homeless looking for services. So while we are an affluent county and we are considered one of the higher earners, we actually have a very high rate of children experiencing homelessness. Our school systems have one of the highest rate of identified homeless students. And on any given night, we have anywhere between 300 and 350 unsheltered homeless within our county. So the need is there and it's growing, and the uncertainty just makes it really difficult to plan. And so our advocates are really important right now.
Thank you, Melanie. Dwayne, what kind of impact is Atlanta Housing seeing now, or is it projecting to see in terms of the number of people needing your services?
We think that that's going to increase. My name is Dwayne Vaughn, and I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for Atlanta Housing. For those of you that don't know, Atlanta Housing is the largest housing authority in the Southeast, and we provide housing for some 27,000 individual families, and that it equals about 45,000 individuals in those families. And so we primarily serve low income and moderate income families. Oh, wow, that's a boost. Okay. And so what we are seeing is an increase, both our Housing Choice Voucher program and our regular program for housing assistance is seeing an increase in the number of families that need assistance. And this is more, we're seeing more and more working families that need assistance because they're not able to negotiate the private market as rents increase, as housing prices increase. And so we're seeing that. So Atlanta Housing deals primarily in three areas: rental assistance, real estate development, and resident empowerment. And so we look at those three kinds of opportunities. Under our new leadership with Terry Lee, we have been more transparent than we've ever been. And so we have a 5-year strategic plan that's on our website and lets everybody know exactly where we are. One thing that we are seeing with the federal government, about 98% of our funding comes from HUD. So we are very, 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 very interested in what's happening in Washington on a day-to-day basis. We have people that are monitoring the presidential discussions every night. We have folks looking at it every day. We're talking with everyone, and we're trying to see how we can continue serving these vulnerable families so that they have a decent and safe place to live.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to take a moment, and George, don't panic, just real quickly to make an announcement, because Dwayne, you mentioned increase in working families. Melanie, you referred to that too. Carol, you may be seeing it as well. And I know that House ATL is going to have a program with Brian Goldstone, author, about a book about the increase in working homeless in America. And Natalie, when is that event?
Alpharetta, and it's 4:30 to 6:30 on October 21st. We're doing it from Great House and several other organizations. So you can find it on our website, houseatl.org/event.
Thank you. I just want to make that connection because these issues are being talked about and looked at, and we're wrestling with them across the region. So thank you all very much for that. Carol, real quickly here, you've mentioned you're seeing more people experiencing homelessness. Caring Works is. Can you give us a sense of what's changing in terms of who's showing up, or maybe they have different needs as they show up?
Sorry about that. I'm used to yelling in my class. One of the things that we've noticed a dramatic increase in is the number of people coming to our corporate office seeking help. And the reason why that is very painful for me and for them is, if you know anything about how COCs operate, we can't take walk-ins seeking housing. They have to be referred through the COC process. And so I went to grab my notes because if you are familiar with partnersforhome.org, they have a dashboard that tells you what the latest data is on the point in time count. And most recent data is that there is a 14% increase in the number of families experiencing homelessness. And there's also an uptick in the number of seniors, adults, obviously 65 and older, even though federally 55 and older counts for that. And that is evident also, even though statistically the numbers may be down for those counted as street homeless. You, like myself, if you're driving through downtown, there's little evidence of a reduction. I will say that under this current administration, it's a very aggressive and hopeful effort in terms of increasing the inventory of affordable housing. There's a lot of good work going on, but it's still a significant time between you deciding as an individual, I need help, I need a roof, and you getting one. We're looking at an average of about 6 months still. And so if we are hearing on a federal level that cuts need to be made, there is a moral imperative for us to have something to say about that. I got ahead of myself.
Okay.
So,
Melanie, I'm going to ask you to reflect on that same question because you already mentioned that you're seeing an increase as well. Are you seeing any difference in the kind of services they need, or is it the same type of services, but just more people needing them?
It's still very similar. We tend to see pretty static trends where we do see an increased need in mental health services and substance abuse services for our unsheltered population.
Okay.
That seems to be one of the largest needs. We are seeing an increase in our families. The challenge with capturing families is that per HUD's definition, if they are living in a hotel and paying for it themselves, they actually are not considered technically homeless. So we try to use the McKinney-Vento standards from the school partnerships and identify on their end who they see. But about 50% from both of our school districts, 50% of their identified homeless are in extended stay motels, which is really hard because they don't qualify for federal programs. You kind of have to do this dance of, getting them somewhere, paying for it through a program, getting them referred in time. But we are seeing an increase in families in cars and people leaving the area because they're running out of options.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Melanie. Dwayne, remind us of HUD's budgeting cycle and where is AH now in that budgeting cycle?
Well, Liz has talked about some of the budgeting cycle. Theoretically, we're supposed to already have a budget from the federal government, and unfortunately, we do not have one. We are hoping that there won't be a government shutdown because that would be disastrous for our families that we are supporting. But we heard from the president's budget. I don't know if anybody's following that. When the president submitted his budget, there was about a 43% cut in housing funding. And so that led us to think very, very seriously about how we were going to move forward. One thing we've noticed with this administration, and we keep reminding our team, is that the time period from an idea to execution has been dramatically shortened. And so if we hear about an idea, it's not, we need to react to that idea and prepare for it, and then hope that all of those ideas will not come to fruition. But that time frame is very, very short. So what we've done is we anticipated that there was going to be some cuts. We were hoping that the House and the Senate would have a much more reasonable cut appetite. So, and our budget starts in July. So we're trying to anticipate, I guess a little bit like you, Melanie, trying to anticipate what's going to happen, given these, what we like to say, interesting times. And so we thought that it would be reasonable for us to take a 15% cut in our budget in anticipation of the budget cuts. And then if it didn't materialize at the federal level, we'd be in a better state. We're still hopeful that that 15% will be enough. And so we are looking very, very carefully at what we're doing budget-wise, and we can perhaps talk about that a little later if you like.
Okay. Carol and Melanie, I know you both also have budget situations, but I want to move on to something else, and that is, what's your perspective of the human cost if emergency housing vouchers or housing first resources are diminished or reduced? What do you see as the cost to human beings? A bit of a moral, spiritual, ethical question there, but also real life too. So.
Yeah, I am 66, almost 67, and I'm still a bit of a Pollyanna in the sense that we lose. Each and every one of us loses. Obviously, the folks that we serve will feel the immediate brunt of it. And I'm not sure if everyone understands, we already, with the current spending that we do, have waiting lists for subsidized housing that is years long, not months long, across the country. And so any cuts that we make tell us more about us than it does about the people that we are seeking to serve. So the human cost is what we lose about ourselves. Housing First is designed, as I shared earlier, to put a roof overhead as soon as possible. We cannot effectively address mental health issues, physical health conditions, or any maladies that someone is dealing with if they don't have a safe place to put their head every night. That should not be hard for anyone to understand, and yet here we are. So there's a meanness that we are unleashing and that we are normalizing that will affect us all.
Melanie, for operating thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think it's going to have a broader impact, obviously, because poverty impacts everybody eventually, right? You might keep yourself away from it in some capacities or find yourself in an area where you can turn away and not look at it. But the trickle down effect is real, and it will start to impact people. And when we already have limited resources for housing in general, especially for affordable housing, especially as you get into rural areas or urban area or suburban areas like where we are. And so taking that away, it causes disruption sort of that just tenfold affects people. Mobility in schools upticks, and so your school partners will see that and feel that, and that impacts schools across the board. It impacts your students. I always used to tell a story about my son when he went to school, had a little girl in his class that he used to call her a mess. And I said, what does that mean? What is the mess at 7, you know? And he said, she's messy and she doesn't bring her schoolwork and she doesn't have her stuff for our groups and we get in trouble and we lose points because she's not ready. And come to find out that her mom was homeless and they were moving around a lot and mom was trying to get her out the door and working at night. And, that it impacted my kid without him even understanding at the age of 7 what that meant. And so I think that we forget that these are our neighbors, right? These are neighbors. These are the people at the grocery store. These are folks that you see every day, and you may have no idea what's happening. So I do think it will have a broader impact from a
Yeah.
person standpoint.
I think, well said, and what you remind me of is something that one of our own hometown heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King, said many years ago about we're all caught in an inescapable web of mutuality. What affects one directly affects all indirectly, right? So that's exactly what you're talking about. Melanie, I'm going to ask you to pick up the mic again, and then Dwayne, I'm going to come to you. Can you explain the differences between ESG programs and COC programs and define those acronyms for people who are not familiar with them, and why local control matters a lot?
Yeah, welcome to our alphabet soup. So all of the grants that we receive from HUD come in various, I call it, it's a game of chutes and ladders, right? So they shoot money down different slides and it comes in different directions. Some of it is managed by the state, some of it is managed by your local county, some of it is even managed by your city or your municipality. Those come in the form of CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. Those are really allocations that are block granted, meaning based on certain criteria, population, poverty levels, they allocate funds for certain projects. The continuum of care was that process or that program was developed by HUD to bring local control around homelessness specifically. So you have to have a designated area for your COC. When you declare we're a COC, you have to pick a geographic region. City of Atlanta Partners for Home is City of Atlanta specific. Fulton County has one. DeKalb County has one. Cobb and Marietta has one. Macon, Augusta, Athens, Savannah, Chatham, and Columbus. And then everything else is managed by balance of state. So the money comes down, we go directly to HUD for those COC dollars. And what the COCs are supposed to do is look at that geography and say, what is our problem? What are we seeing? What resources do we have available? What are the gaps? And how, based on what we know about our people in our county, how do we best address that? Because homelessness in the city of Atlanta looks very different than it does in Athens or in Columbus or in Cobb. And so local control provides you the ability to really work directly with your partners that know the community, that know the people, that have the resources and can act appropriately for that area. Those HUD grants also come with a lot of red tape. So it's kind of our jumping off point for what do we have to do? What do we know is actually best practice, which isn't always what we have to do, and how do we make those things work together? And so that's what the COCs do, working with partners and training them and providing resources for data. And then we have match requirements as well. So we have to come up with 25% match for every dollar that we get through those COC programs. So 25 cents on the dollar, pretty reasonable. It can't just be, I have that in my budget either, which would be great because that would be my rent or anything else I have to pay that's not sexy that nobody wants to pay for. But it's 25 cents on the dollar to that program. So if I pay $1 in rent to somebody through that program, I have to actually pay $1.25, and 25 cents has to come out of my unrestricted dollars. So that's doable for most of us. It's a reasonable request. We can manage through that and we plan for that. A grant that exists, and this is something that didn't happen, but it is not off the table. The director of HUD has actually talked about this openly, that he feels like it's a decent idea or a way to move things around is to eliminate the COC programs and move everything into what they call the Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG. Emergency Solutions Grant exists through the block grant funding right now, and that is very specifically for certain types of programs, lots of shelter programs, some housing supports and housing services, and that's allocated through the block grant. They want to push everything into the ESG grant because there's limitations on that and it's block granted. The argument that was made was that it gives more local control, which if you're doing the math, if you're taking it out of a county or a community and you're bringing it up to the state level, it does not actually accomplish that. So that's a little bit of a false narrative. It brings it up higher. It gives the states more control over where they want those dollars to go specifically. It definitely will leave certain communities out of that process. And the other piece that is not talked about that most people don't know unless you do this on a regular basis, ESG grants are a 100% match requirement. So if I all of a sudden get $500,000 pushed into an ESG grant, I now have to come up with $500,000 myself, which is way more than that 25%. And so that would be, I mean, really, it would be the kiss of death for a lot of nonprofits. They would not be able to manage that. And quite frankly, our corporate partners and our philanthropic partners wouldn't be able to sustain us either. And so it would become a fight for who's going to sort of, so it would be like the Hunger Games. And we don't want to do that. It's not a good way to get your nonprofits pitted against each other.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Dwayne, some of the proposed HUD changes include citizenship requirements, time limits, you mentioned that earlier, and regionalization of housing authorities. Which of these do you see as potentially most disruptive and why?
We see that all of them are different from what we are currently doing.
Okay.
We don't believe that many of them have the appropriate infrastructure in place. And what we'd like to see before we commented publicly on it is more details. So for term limits, there was a proposal that individuals would have housing assistance for 2 years, and thereafter they would be forever barred from getting housing assistance. We are not sure that taking someone who is earning less than $17,000 a year, even with all of the support that we would provide, they would be able to get through and be off of our subsidy in 2 years. We note that when you go to college, the normal time is 4 years to get an advanced degree. And so we just don't think that that's the right term limit that needs to be in place. When we talk about the citizenship, we understand that the administration is deeply focused on making sure resources go only to U.S. citizens. That is not as much of an issue for us in Atlanta because most of the folks we are serving aren't in mixed families. That might be an issue for other parts of the country, but we are Atlanta-based. We are worried about what's happening in Atlanta, even though we support our brothers and sisters across the nation. The regionalization, we need to see that, and we're very concerned about that. One of the best things about housing authorities is that it's local, and it's the local government gets a chance to weigh in on who serves on the Board of Commissioners and what the direction is. If you go to a regionalization, we don't know how that consolidation will be. We believe there will be a lot of fights with local entities not wanting to relinquish that. And quite frankly, we think that perhaps some of the larger housing authorities would be scorned through no fault of their own. They just happen to be larger and it looks a little better. So some of these ideas are interesting.
Sound good on paper, but yes, I know you have to be politic. Okay. Well said, sir. Well said. Okay. So now all of us who know Bill know that Bill always sees things as half full, not half empty. And you've been talking a lot of the detrimental impacts of these changes, which is very true. And there's no doubt about that. But what's one concrete action that those of us who are listening to you and those online can take to help support your work or the larger ecosystem that tends to address these needs? What 1 or 2 actions do you think we can individually be responsible for doing?
I think one of the actions is not to sit on the sidelines and believe that this is only a nonprofit or a public housing issue. This is an issue as to, thank you. We see this as an issue as to what is the quality of life that we want to have in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And so we need developers to let folks know that this is going to hurt the quality of life. We need city governments. We need just interested individuals to let their Congress folks know, hey, this is an important matter. The other thing I think we have to do as public housing authorities and as nonprofits is we have to speak the language of the current administration. And the language of the current administration is in economic terms. And so we have to talk about what is our economic impact and what will be the economic impact to the community if you do some of these cuts. So at Atlanta Housing, we've been talking much more on economics. We've been talking about 18% of the rental units are somehow supported by Atlanta Housing. We've been talking about $274 million is being poured into the local economy through our housing choice voucher. This administration, we believe, is focused on impact, and the economic way that we are talking about things is an impact. So I think what it's helped us do is one of the benefits is it helps us talk in more economic impact kinds of ways. And I think that helps us both with this administration, but also helps us with the corporate and the philanthropic communities so that they can understand those numbers.
Okay. Melanie, what one thing or a couple of things that we can do to support your work?
I think that the biggest thing is just to be involved, be an advocate, be a champion, and don't be quiet about it. Nonprofits and service providers and housing providers, I mean, all of us are going to need the support to get through the next couple of years. And so get involved in your community, find out what's happening in your area, serve on a board, go volunteer somewhere and encourage your companies or the philanthropic sector you're with to really consider the way that they give and that strategy behind it. And do your research, be educated on the topic. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So it gets really hard to fight the fight when you're constantly trying to correct things that are being said. So share information that is valid and true, and uplifts the community. Because that's, we don't do this work. Trust me, we don't do this work for fame and fortune. That's not coming anytime soon. All of us who are in this sector do it because we are passionate about the people we serve and being part of the community and making it better. And so support those people that that do that, because it can be a tough road.
Okay. And Carol?
Hard to come up with too much beyond that. What I always say when asked this kind of question is we have to give a damn. And encourage your friends to, because you're here because you
can
care.
Clap. It's fine. If you like something, you're here. You can show your appreciation.
Yeah, I used to be afraid to write letters and call my congressman and things of that nature. But there's an urgency for us to do that. We have to advocate. And if I can do a shameless plug, donate to your favorite nonprofit housing organization. No names need be mentioned.
Shameless plugs are welcome. Okay.
So,
You want to add one more thing, Dor?
I just wanted to add one more thing. Given these interesting times, if your local nonprofit or your housing authority does something that you're not particularly pleased with, please give some grace. Because if you go off, what will happen is in Washington, there'll be a presumption that the housing authority or the nonprofit is not doing what they need to do, and therefore we need to take away that funding or restrict it or otherwise. So if things aren't quite the way you want them to be, give some grace.
Melanie made that same point earlier. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now it's time for your questions, and Nana Simmons is going to help us be a mic runner. If you have a question, raise your hand and she will bring the microphone to you. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. When I facilitate and I take audience questions, I cut off people who want to give a dissertation before the question. We don't have time for that. We only have 10 minutes. We want to get as many questions in as possible. So if you're giving a dissertation, I'm going to stop you. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm trying to be sure everybody has an opportunity to get those questions. So who's got questions? I threatened you enough that nobody's got questions. All right, that gives me more time. Okay, nobody's got any questions about anything? Bruce, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bruce Gunter. I always have questions. So I would like you guys to pull the your crystal ball, pull the lens way back. And this is something that's occurred to me, that as a city or any area prospers, like the city of Atlanta particularly, rents are going up, new coffee shops, everything is increasing. All of the work that you do is impacted by an equal and opposite reaction of increasing unaffordability. Because I think that that's capitalism. And I don't know, Dwayne or Melanie or Carol, if you can look out that far and prognosticate, how in the world are we going to diminish this increasing bifurcation between rich people and poor people?
Thank you, Bruce. All right, challenging question.
It is a challenging question. I actually do think there are some good examples of those things living together. So I think the normalization of mixed use spaces and mixed income spaces and having walkability and having communities that are all together, that's where you really see difference being made when you stop segregating based on socioeconomics. And it's always going to play a role. Business is business, right? Business is here to make money, and they will continue to go after it. Money is powerful, so the more you make, the more they're going to want. Any area that sees prosperity is going to continue to see that. But I think when you have innovation and you have people who are willing to come out of the box and make those things live together, that's where you see people really prosper. And so it's okay that down the street or on the first floor of your condo is somebody who makes $30,000 a year. That's okay. We can all stay in the same spaces and be okay. And I think that's where we have to start moving, is really looking at that mixed use availability, because then everybody wins, right? You put it all in there.
Anybody else got a response to that?
I would just say that this is an issue as to what we want our city to actually look like. And so if we could come together and have a social consciousness, much like Carol was talking about, as to what a healthy city looks like, and then we can tell what are the pieces that everyone has to do. And Atlanta's in a unique place because House ATL did exactly that. So we already have a model that shows what that looks like. And I think we just need to, those that are more affluent, we need to let them know that just making money is not enough. You need to pour back into our city in some sort of way.
Okay. This is a question from one of our virtual viewers, Pam Storm. And she says, I am a small affordable housing provider, 60 units small, and I and other providers have 20% vacancies with double and triple insurance costs and higher property taxes. Voucher holders can choose properties with amenities, and workforce renters struggle to make rent payments. Affordable housing providers are crunched in the middle. What are some options to help smaller developers? That actually may be, okay.
I think a couple of things that a smaller developer can do, they can team up with a larger developer and get understanding of those economics. They can let us know what their issues are, and we might be able to provide some help through vouchers or through other support. They can also make sure that they participate in forums like this and in other places. Because a lot of the housing that is provided is coming from smaller providers. So this is, and they need to know that this is not a problem that they need to solve by themselves. This is a community problem. This is an affordable housing problem. And so get with the broader ecosystem so that we can help figure out how to solve it. And that all assumes that the development is well managed and is a development that people will want to actually live in.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think just to add to that too, we do have some good examples. Starcy comes to mind, and I know they've been here, but connect your residents to organizations that are in your community that can help offset that. We do food security and other assistance for people who are in that sort of missing middle that maybe don't qualify for subsidies, but need something to help make ends meet. And there are a lot of programs that focus on stability, offer childcare, bring something like that into your community and partner with somebody who can strengthen your residents.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Any other questions? Microphone back here. Hey, Mary Newton. Former colleague, we used to work together, that's how I know her name.
Hi, everybody. I have a question about, somebody mentioned earlier the increase in older adults who are homeless. And I wondered if you had a sense of whether they were people who had just aged into homelessness, or were you seeing people who are losing their jobs? What is the background of the people who you are seeing now who are older and homeless?
So our senior population, most of them are on a fixed income. And when you see your property taxes and other costs of living increase and you don't have an income that's pacing with that, a lot of them are either losing housing that they've had for a while, or being forced out of properties that are selling or raising rents that they just can't assume because they don't have a way to increase income. And so that has been our biggest population. The other one is as you get older, you have health issues, and health costs can be the fastest way into a homeless situation because of not being able to afford rents because you're paying for medication and hospital bills. So that's been the majority of ours have been priced out of where they lived. They did not, they were not homeless and then aging and stayed homeless. They are definitely folks that are homeless at a higher age.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Here's another question from an online viewer. Dr. Chuck Barlow Jr. asked, well, he says, first, we are underhoused. How long will it take us to balance out? And are there models of communities who have started to figure this out? Any other place around the country that we've seen encouraging examples of getting, quote unquote, getting it right or moving toward getting it right?
Shameless plug for Atlanta. I believe that we are moving in the right direction. This is such a difficult issue. And this is such an issue that is going to take the entire community to solve, that I'm not sure everybody is struggling with their unique demographics, with their unique challenges. And so I would just say that Atlanta at least is talking about it in a way that makes sense and has brought many more people to the conversation that used to not be in this conversation at all. And so I don't know whether that answers the question, but I think that's where we are as a community.
Yeah, and I will say very quickly, echoing what Dwayne says, from my experiences earlier in my career, when I talk with colleagues across the country who also run or agencies like the Atlanta Regional Commission, we are light years ahead in collaboration in this community, more so than many of our peers across the nation. They're just beginning to grapple with collaborating in order to address issues. We've been collaborating for a while. Issues haven't gotten any better necessarily, but at least we've been talking together and working together for a while. And I think that puts us a slight step ahead. Yeah. All right. Microphone.
Morning, Maureen Freehill, National Church Residences. My question is, in an environment of diminishing resources, what tools or collaborations or technologies have y'all found to be really effective to help fill some of those gaps so that you can continue to meet your mission?
Great question. We try to focus on what we do best, and then outsource and collaborate with the rest. So I can't do everything, but I can tell you that providing housing for families who are homeless is not solving their issues. They're homeless for a lot of reasons, and those reasons take time to solve. And the one piece that is sort of underfunded and really hard is the case management piece. So we go in and try to unpack what the issue is, but I'm not going to have a specialist on staff that's going to address every single piece of that. So we have partnered with people in our area that do it better. So I don't mess with employment anymore. I went straight to our work source Cobb, WorkSource Georgia arm, and said, you know, can you help us? And so I have a case manager that's dedicated that I help pay for, but she's got access to all their stuff because they do it better than we do. So I think for us, it's really remembering that we can't be all things to all people and we can't try. So we really have to make those partnerships go deeper with the folks that do it better so that we can get our folks connected to the services they need without everybody duplicating and doing the same things.
Good, thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and we've got to move on to the rest of the program. If you have additional questions, I would encourage you to email them to George Bergen and the Regional Housing Forum website. Just send them in and we'll try to see if we can get them answered and responded to you by email. But we have to move on. Can we thank our panelists for this morning? So we're now shifting to our second panel, which we're calling Development Impact and Response. Also continuing to think about reflecting on the national situation. In this panel, we're going to be joined by Carmen Chubb, the CEO of Columbia Residential, Kim Golden, who's Director of the Office of Housing Finance at Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and Richard Slayton, an Executive Director with JP Morgan Chase. So will you all come and join us, panelists? And Kim, oh, here she is. All right. Let's welcome our second panel here. So for my panel colleagues, opening question, please start by reminding the audience of your organization and its work and your role in that organization. And then here's the question. Recent federal changes from the 4% credit floor being made permanent to the bond test dropping from 50% to 25%, and a 12% increase in the 9% credit for LIHTC. All those are very significant. From where you and your organization sits, what do you see as the most immediate impact of these changes on housing production in Metro Atlanta and Georgia? Okay, so whoever wants to start.
Well, I think I got the bad seat. I'm Carmen Chubb. I'm the president. I got the good seat. Good seat next.
Go wrong.
Right. I was hoping Kim would be first, but I'm Carmen Chubb. I'm the president of Columbia Residential. Doug gave me a promotion. I'm not the CEO. Jim Growley's the CEO. He's my business partner. We work together to do mixed income development. That is our focus. Our home base is Atlanta. Most of our work is in Atlanta and surrounding areas, but we also work in Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida. But Atlanta's our primary market area. When we talk about the recent changes, the first thing that we had to do was look at deals in our pipeline to see if they work under the lower threshold. Not only did we need to do that for our own purposes, we had to do that with our state agency partners. The one deal we had already allocated as a 4% deal in Georgia, we did an analysis of our perm debt to see if we could support more non-tax exempt perm debt in the structure, and we could not. So our request is to keep the level of bonds that we have in the deal and close it at the beginning of 2026. But as we have other deals in our pipeline, we obviously are working with the lower threshold. The other thing is on the 9% side. I know the allocations that will be made this year from speaking with DCA will be for 2026 credits. So we will already see the increase. So our fingers are crossed for our 9% application in the round and hoping to get that more deals funded in the current 9% round and of course in the future.
She's right.
I will go. Sorry.
Let's try Carmen's. How about that? There you go.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, everybody. So again, my name's Kim Golden. I work for the Georgia Department of Community Affairs in the Office of Housing Finance. What that means is well, first and foremost, Georgia DCA is the Economic and Community Development Agency serving the state of Georgia in a number of programs across the housing continuum. What happens out of my office, you may have heard of the LIHTC or the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. The beginning stages of all of that is run out of my office. So everything from that original qualified allocation plan to when your property places in service. Wow, how to succinctly answer the initial what happened when this all came out. Let's be real, a lot of confusion and speculation, right? This is the first change like this in decades. And so the state really wanted to take the time to understand, what are the implications here? And what did the 50% test mean versus now, well, what does a 25% test mean? And in brief, what we learned is the 50% test honestly was excessive. Most deals really just do not need a full 50% of bond finance for the deal to be feasible. So what that means is that those bonds are issued and they're paid back so quickly when they really could have been doing more out there. So I do think that ultimately this is a great change. Trying to not get in the weeds too much here. I do want to, you asked about the 4% floor. I do want to acknowledge that that's really great, right? Because doing any kind of development is so speculative. You need to know so far in advance, what are your numbers going to be, and hope they don't change and hope prices don't go up. So with the 4% floor becoming permanent, what that did was created stability. Instead of knowing that the market's going to change and maybe your numbers are going to change, developers, bankers, all of us can make better choices, more informed choices, and know what those numbers are going to look like a little more predictably. So the first priority that the state had with the 25% test changing was, as Carmen mentioned, we wanted to look at this incoming round. We will take in applications for the 4% tax credits in October. And those will be the first that will officially benefit from the 25% test. And the current rules and regulations for the state of Georgia are written to say that deals are underwriting to 55%. You always want to have a little wiggle room for those numbers changing. So 55% or $40 million limit. Very short version of that story is we concluded it is too close to application time to ask the development community to completely rethink their deal and take the bonds all the way down to 30%. Again, you want that wiggle room over the 25. So we told the community that our expectation is that they bring in these applications in October, showing us only the amount of bond that they truly need for feasibility. And if that happens to be 50% and $40 million, I very much doubt it. But the point is that is still the limit for this year. Didn't require us to change the QAP. And the numbers will tell the story, right? You're not going to come in and ask for more because that'll show in your numbers. So we felt that was a comfortable place to go. And in brief, the other piece we needed to look at was those that are currently in the pipeline, meaning those that came in October 2024 for an award and were given an award. If any of those applications and those developments are looking to actually close and start construction in 2026, then that actually allows that 25% test to activate. And the state, as Carmen mentioned, the state asked everybody in the pipeline to please take a look at their situation. If you could close this year, fantastic. That's the best news. It gets units online faster. We're all ready to go. Let's do it. We're right there with you. But for those that were in a position for a number of reasons, it could be permitting. It could be, they're still working on zoning. There's a lot of reasons why some of these applications take a little longer to get to actual construction. So for this year, we said, well, hey, there is an opportunity here. If you will go ahead and make the election to close early next year, then we would actually like you to redo your numbers and show us the actual bond amount that you need rather than that full amount. Because what that does is that means there is more for the following years. So the short version of this is we responded by reassessing what was the resource, what were the implications, and what was the right decision to make for these next rounds without disrupting existing projects that are coming in to apply or that have already received an award. And I think that we have accomplished that. So
Okay.
sorry for my long-winded answer, but the state has the long answer on this one.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll hear more from you later.
Yeah.
Richard.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Slayton, and I'm with JP Morgan Chase. I'm Executive Director in the Community Development Real Estate Group, where I provide financing for affordable housing and workforce housing projects. Your question, from where I sit, what do I see as the immediate impact? So they have a banker up here for a reason. So I think the devil is going to be in the details. I think it's fantastic, that this change has actually occurred, but from an economic standpoint, and I think Kim mentioned it and Carmen mentioned it, what does that do to economic feasibility? I'll start by saying this, just on its surface, anytime you increase supply of something, there's an opposite reaction, meaning in this case, what I think is going to happen, you'll see an increased supply of the credit, so that means more deals can get funded. You'll see an increase in quantity demanded, to me, at the project level, where you have more developers submitting projects to get the funding. But the third piece of that is the equity price and the tax credit price. And I think we're going to see a downward trend on the equity pricing, which could potentially cause a gap in a developer's budget. So they have to look for ways to figure out how to do that or fill that gap, whether it's with some subordinate financing or deferred developer fee or whatever. On the debt side, and when you look at bond deals, moving the 50% test down to 25, which is great, but it could potentially cause a taxable tail to be attached to the bond deals. What does that mean for the development budget? 4% bonds, the interest rate's typically tax exempt. If you use a taxable tail to supplement the tax exempt rate, those rates are taxable, which increases the interest carry line item in your budget, which thus could potentially cause more gap. So these are the kinds of things that I would look at or that I see kind of going forward.
Okay. Kim, I want to come back to you. As Richard mentioned, you're likely to see increased applications, increased competition from developers. On the 9% side, that 12% on the 9% LIHTC credit, that 12% increase is welcome, but how is DCA going to adjust its policies like the Qualified Action Plan to help make sure that those changes actually result in more units getting built?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So we are working very hard to analyze, predict, and contain costs as much as possible, right? Because more resources are fantastic, but as a lot of you know in this room, it also still costs money to build and renovate housing. So we want to be very mindful in all things of being very diligent with our resources and making sure that they are being spread as equitably and fairly and where they're needed as much as possible. So we do expect to see a modest increase in unit production, probably pretty immediately, right? Because a 12% increase in credits is pretty straightforward, right? It's the number we've been getting will now be larger. So, and we're still in an active QAP in the state of Georgia. For those that don't know, we do a 2-year QAP. So while this bill came out, we're still under the existing rules. But for those that are engaged with our process, they know the 2026 through 2027 QAP did actually slightly raise the credit per unit that's allowed. And that's in part in response to understanding that the costs are hard. We also raised the developer fee a little bit, actually, which one helps the bottom line. But honestly, another motivation for that is, I think you referred to deferred developer fee. One of the toolkits that developers do have is the ability to defer some of that fee that they'll make as another source to help close those gaps. So those are some changes we made in part with this in mind. But the big messaging here is there's no reason to not expect to see more units out of it. I feel like it's as simple as there's more resource, you're going to see something more. But the big changes you see in our QAP is we're really looking at costs and what it's actually costing to build those and make sure that this is spreading as far as possible.
Okay, thank you. Carmen, I'm going to ask you to help those of us who are not as steeped in this world. Can you actually show us an example? We're going to get that up on the board here and walk us through the math and how does this change in the lower bond test actually change out the math for a project?
Okay, so what you see before you is a modified version of a transaction we recently closed in Texas. And I changed some things just to make it easier to see what the impact will be under a 25% test scenario. Factoring in Georgia, it would be 30%. I want to say, just in looking at it, I'm going to say simplified. So for the developers in the room doing all the calculations, don't do that. It is the simplified version because everything is a what if and if this, then that. But I do want to comment on one thing Kim said to start out with, which is, some transactions had more bonds than they needed, and they needed that to meet the 50% test. I saw Tommy in the back room. I don't know if he's still here. We had a deal in Georgia where we needed more bonds strictly for the purposes of meeting the 50% test. And those kinds of things, put deals in jeopardy just because you don't need as much bond. So this is a welcome change. I'm always going to support things that make the program better, even if they come with some challenges as well. But in this particular scenario, you will see factored in some of the things that Richard talked about. Number one, potential lower prices for equity, just simply from supply and demand. So in this example, I estimated a 3-cent reduction in the credit pricing. Also, on this transaction and on others, we use a cash back forward structure, which we issue the bonds at closing, invest them, and then the interest earnings on those bonds are a source for the development budget. So you see here in the 50% test scenario, we estimated that at $355,000. If we have fewer bonds, therefore we have fewer proceeds to invest, then we have less interest to count as a source. So on the 25% test side has 177,000 in interest earnings. So that went down. So the two primary changes I factored in here are the reduction in interest earnings and the reduction in credit pricing. And the result is an increased need for subsidy. In this example, we had $1.5 million from the community foundation. Everything else was from the city or the county. So I just, for the purposes of illustration, increased the foundation funding by $500,000. And then our deferred developer fee in this example went from 28% to 31%. Again, factoring in what Kim said, developer fee can be a source. In Georgia, it can't be more than 50% of the developer fee, which is good. But you want to keep that at a level that it supports the deal, but you still have fee that you earn throughout the process. So in the first example, we were at 54, a little over 54% on the 50% test, and the second example, 32%. The bond allocation under the 50% test was $15,716,000. And in the 25% test, really to get to the 30%, the bond allocation is $9.3 million. So it shows you on a simplistic level how it impacts. You use fewer bond proceeds, but you need more soft money because your equity pricing is possibly going to be down. I didn't do state credits in this example because it's in Texas. We don't have a state credit, but the math doesn't change in that example.
So a follow-up question with that. So with equity costs rising and you're trying to figure out how to find ways to close the gaps on deals, how might Columbia navigate that situation without giving away competitive secrets?
One of the things I wrote down when Richard was talking was relationships. It really does matter who your equity partners are and who you build relationships with. We see that a lot of our partners want to be in the deal from top to bottom. So they want to do the equity for the federal, the state. They want to be the issuer. So I think the thing to keep in mind, the issuer when you're doing the underwriter, when you're doing the cash forward. So the thing to keep in mind is how can you build those relationships so that you can obtain the best pricing in a scenario where just from what we've read and heard from the previous panel, the soft funding is not going to be as readily available as it has been. In preparation for this panel, looking at the pre-read information that George sent out, I mean, it's pretty stark what may happen to home and some of the other sources we use for affordable rental housing development. So for Columbia, it's making sure we have those strong partnerships. It's building more partnerships with community foundations or organizations that do program-related investments. As you know, in our development process in Tennessee, there's a interest among the business community, like Atlanta, in making program-related investments. So you just have to bring more resources to the table.
So Richard, you mentioned this, Carmen and Kim also mentioned this. So this change in the 4% program and the 25% bond test is going to increase more demand, but it's also going to put upward pressure on equity pricing. So how might Chase evaluate which deals to support or back in this new environment?
First of all, I think Carmen hit it dead on the head with those relationships. I think that's critical because if you establish that long-term relationship with your financial partner, you can kind of work through a lot of things that may arise and you guys work together to get it done. But in terms of how Chase evaluates affordable housing deals, I don't think, given the change, much of that is going to be different. I mean, we'll still look at the developer's strength. What kind of experience do they have? If they're property managing it themselves, what kind of expertise and experience does that property manager have with affordable housing projects? We'll also look at the financial capacity of the developer. Do they have the ability to pull it off? Meaning, looking at financial statements and how many units they have under, management and all those kinds of things. We'll still take a look at the market to see, if there's high demand for affordable housing, like we all know here in Atlanta that it is. We'll look at the deal structure itself. We talked about the equity pricing may go down, but we want to look at the stability of that equity price and give you an example. I would say not too long ago, you could probably get about 90 cents on federal credits. But now, they're in the low 80s, which is like 81, 82 cents. That's a 7 or 8% cents change, which affects that source number dramatically. So, we have to look at stuff like that. And also just the typical, risk mitigants, the construction, the lease up, stabilization. And again, that's where that property management comes into play.
So I'm going to ask you, following up on that question, given that we're having rising costs and thinner margins, what would help investors like you, like Chase, to keep capital flowing, whether it's from federal tools, state policies, or even local incentives? What would help you all to keep the capital flowing to help support this work?
First of all, I do think the tax credits, more of them is a good thing, but I do think in the long run, we'll see some stability. Now, whether they get back up to 90 cents or $1.05 like they were 100 years ago, who knows? But I do think, given this federal change, we'll have to take a look at, some kind of extra subsidies. Kim and Carmen and I talked about this the other week, and we were talking about the National Trust Funds over there at DCA. I mean, is there an opportunity to increase that, for example? Look at the state, look at the state level, faster approvals getting through the permitting process, because the longer it takes you to get through that process, the more money is costing, because that's not free. So really anything to shorten that time frame, tighten up the budget, bringing costs down, and look at maybe doing some kind of fee waivers to get through the entitlement process. So basically, these are just some high level things that I can kind of think of that would actually help the capital keeps flowing, because from a lending standpoint, the rates are what they are, and we price something, like some spread over SOFR, as we call it, or the equity pricing is the equity pricing. That's going to be based upon, supply, demand, economics. And also what I didn't mention is, the Community Reinvestment Act. So banks have appetites in different markets. So one of the things you want to take into account is the affordable housing project that you're building. Is it in the bank's Community Reinvestment Act footprint? So that's basically a regulatory thing that the banks have to respond to, this because they have to show that they're making investments in the communities in which they serve. So that's another piece of it as well.
Okay. Thank you. So Carmen, I've got a question for you, and then Kim, I'm going to ask you to reflect on the same question. At the community level, what difference do these changes make in the kinds of projects you can bring forward, and how might they affect the families and communities that Columbia serves? And then Kim, I'm going to ask you to reflect on that same question from kind of a broader state perspective.
I should have pointed this out when we had the previous slide up. The transaction that I showed was 100 units of affordable housing, all affordable. We're doing income averaging there, but we also have 16 units of PSH, and it's in partnership with the Salvation Army, the local Salvation Army, who use the COC fund. So it really ties back to a lot of what we heard earlier. One of the things that we found there, so you see in the county, the ERA2, that $4 million, the county really wanted PSH in the transaction. So they put $4 million to make sure that could happen. But on the operation side, you have to get the rents to be able to support the operation of the property. So that partnership with the Salvation Army is excellent, but when you look at how that's being underwritten in the environment that we're in right now, everybody is talking about, overhangs on the rent, and, what happens if HUD doesn't continue to fund the COCs, or what happens if it flows through another mechanism or doesn't happen at all. So we had to do some creative guarantees throughout this process to get this loan closed, where we have to earn out our developer fee. So if you looked at, I told you I tweaked that a little bit, because if you saw the deferred fee, you would say, why in the world? But we're going to earn out that fee by delivering those PSH units with the rents that we believe we'll get from Salvation Army. So as a developer, there's just so much, optimism, reasonable optimism you have to have. In that case, if it doesn't come through a COC, then it has to come through another avenue, either with a PHA partner or another partner that has the appetite to support those residents. I say that, Doug, in response to your question, because I think those are the things that'll be challenged the most. It'll be a whole lot easier to do a straightforward deal where you're not doing PSH or you're not doing any lower targeting if you don't have to. So to really continue to move the needle to bring forward the deals that make a difference in communities, we're really going to have to tap into other sources of soft funding. And I should have said this in the introduction of Columbia. For those of you who we've worked with in Atlanta, I think we don't do anything easy. Very seldom do we have something that we've done that's easy. And by easy, I mean we're usually serving a deeper targeted tenant or PSH, or working with the housing authority to make sure we can provide units for low-income seniors or things like that. So it's very important to us to continue to advocate for sources that support the development and fill the gaps. Even on our prep call, I was lobbying Kim for that. So not for Columbia, but for the industry in general.
Okay. Kim, can you reflect on that?
Sure. So from the state perspective, it's a little different, right? Our duty is really to review those applications and the conceptualized projects that come to us and check them for feasibility, check them against our program rules. But in reality, we do have an influence, right? That qualified allocation plan is what tells the developers what kind of framework we want them to be putting these applications together under. And so how we're responding to this, again, the conversation about costs and the needs of the state, right? We're taking a really concentrated look at, first and foremost, is that QAP serving the needs of the state? Are we incentivizing activities that really are what's needed? We obviously get feedback that the more activities we ask developers to do, for example, wraparound services, extra amenities, different kinds of community engagement, those can add costs. But as we've said a lot in this room today, a lot of those costs are necessary for what we're doing. So we are going to, obviously the 26-27 QAP will be finalized at the end of this year. We are spending the next 2 years working very hard on listening, first of all. Big part of this is the development community has to help us understand to an extent, right? Like are those challenges? And let's talk about it. Let's do the research. Let's get the data. Let's find the numbers. There's so many of y'all out here already doing it. So since I have this platform today, that is my request is, we have a form on our website to give us commentary about the QAP. Please use it and let's have a conversation. So all of this to say, it's a critical time to not only look at what does this program cost us, what is it producing, and what we're all going to be figuring out over the coming years really what all of this means. And so again, I just repeat, I think it's critical that we continue having these conversations and understanding that, again, it takes these relationships and the state is here to be a part of that as much as feasible.
Okay. So this is a question for all three of you, and you can take it in any order you want to. Do you think that these federal policy changes are going to give us a stronger foundation for affordable housing production? And if you do think that, then what's next steps at the state, local, or federal level would help Atlanta and other communities actually scale the production up and preserve more affordable housing, produce and preserve more affordable housing? Do you think these policy changes will make a stronger foundation for production? And if so, what other things have to go along with it?
I'll start with that. So I kind of alluded to it earlier, right?
Yeah.
I think in the short run, the answer I gave earlier, we're going to see that, and that's going to be pretty pronounced. But I do think in the long run, it could prove to be very beneficial. But I think what needs to happen is collaboration with the state and local governments, i.e., let's say we're talking about the city of Atlanta, expediting a entitlement process. Again, that cuts costs. Or, looking at, other subordinate types of financing, those kinds of things. But so I think it has to be, can't just be, we got an increase in credits. It has to be, we have an increase in credits and something, and that and something should come from the state and local governments.
Okay. Kim,
I'll go
or
next.
Carmen,
Yeah.
either one of them?
I do think that this is a net positive. We spoke a little bit today about how the 50% test truly meant that there were bonds just kind of being recycled quickly. I think this really allows for a better use of the resources that we have. But I'm going to repeat the same thing my colleagues here have today. The concerns come from, so there are states that have lots and lots of what we call the soft funding, home funds, national trust funds, plus different things through the state, through different things. And in Georgia, frankly, it's a little tighter. We are not swimming in the soft funds to be able to offer our development community to fill those gaps. You speak about housing trust funds. It's very small what we get each year, and we don't have direct influence over what that number is. So what I think the gap is, and this is tying back to something the first panel spoke about, right, is if I could manifest something, it would be more trust, honestly, in this entire system of what we do. I think it's very important that all the regulations and all the reviews of what it takes you to get that permitting, I think all of that's very, very important. And it also does create a lot of delays. I obviously think it's very important that the state reviews those applications and make sure that they're telling us the truth and that what the plan makes sense and is feasible. And it's on us to try to make sure those timelines are also reasonable because we can create those delays. So the last comment I want to make is, if I could just manifest anything, it would be more funds with less restrictions, because threading the needle in these programs can be so difficult. Honestly, finding the household that both qualifies to live there, but actually can still afford the rent is so much harder than you would think. And every time we add in these soft sources, they often have their own set of requirements. And sometimes those requirements, guess what, cost more money. So it's a catch-22 in a way that, great, I've got my home funds, but now I've got a NEPA review and Davis-Bacon. And, we just passed the Build America, Buy America, which I understand, I think that's fantastic. And it's directly affecting affordable housing if you're using federal funding. So my plea would be to state, other organizations, come to the table, come up. There was a great, the Rural Workforce Housing Initiative, I think was a fantastic example of something that the governor actually put out that did not have a lot of the restrictions that a lot of other programs do, and is actually being able to do some good out there. So it's completely possible. I think it's more critical than ever that we talk about these gaps, and let's get some messaging on the same page, right? Because it's interesting that you're going to talk about cutting some programs while expanding another. So I hope that we, as a community and country, can get to on the same page about a lot of this stuff.
Carmen?
I agree. It's a net positive. I think what we've seen over the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, maybe a little longer, is that people recognize that affordable housing is critical to communities. I spent many years, traveling the state, talking to people who didn't, as much as they needed affordable housing in their community, they didn't want it because they thought it brought all these things that they didn't want. I'm not traveling the state in that way, in the same way right now, but I do see from the state level, we're seeing it from an administration that there's a level of understanding that housing is critical to people and communities. So in that way, I think it's positive. I think with any change, there's yin and yang, and there's things that people didn't consider. If the desire is to make sure we have more housing available that people can afford, I hope it informs what's happening in Congress. Those members have to come home and look at us and hear from us, as Carol mentioned, writing letters. So continuing to support those resources that support the outcome that we're all going for. But I also want to touch on two things. One is innovation, because I don't think we can keep doing it the way we're doing it now. Atlanta has done a lot in innovation with the AUD. I know some of that's being lifted up in Chattanooga. They hired the gentleman from Atlanta to lift that up in Chattanooga as well, which is financing without credits. Still means soft money, so there's no substitute for still filling those gaps, but we have to innovate. The innovation has to come around time, because time is money. It has to come around regulations. If you look at just a closing statement and you see all these fees that you're paying to do this affordable housing, if we could cut that in half, we could do more affordable housing. And I'm not saying people should not get paid. If you're a consultant, doing inspections or, whatever it is you're bringing to the transaction, you need to be compensated for it. But I think stepping back and saying, do we need all this, kind of goes to what Kim said. It's an element of trust in that maybe folks can rely on other reports, like one report that everybody uses instead of everybody having their own report. Maybe that's wishful thinking. I don't know that I would want to rely on somebody's report if I didn't think our interests were aligned. So, the devil's in the details. But we can't keep building it up in the way that it is now, with just taking longer, costing more, and thinking we're going to have enough resources to do it. So.
Okay, great. So overall net positive, but a lot of things that we have to be mindful of. Having more innovation in the process at each level, having more trust and more funds with fewer restrictions, having more collaboration, and paying attention to expediting our entitlement and permitting process overall. So there's a lot more that other partners have to do in order to make these federal policy changes really realize and turn into meaningful housing increases. So thank you all for that. It's time for our Q&A session. Before I come to the live audience, I'm going to start with the virtual audience, but the microphone will come to you. Nana, if we can get the microphone. Where's Nana? Okay. Well, we'll get a microphone to you at some point in time. But before I do that, let me give a comment from an online listener and then a question from a second online listener. This comment comes from Gary Haynes, who says, I'm listening from Idaho. We have the same issues and concerns here. Very impressed with this panel and their expertise. So kudos to you all. And that also gives me a platform to say kudos to George Bergen and the team for lining up both panelists today. So this question comes from online listener Adam Graham. Can this scramble, this voucher uncertainty, the financing gaps, increased utilization, ultimately push toward more projects incorporating tenant ownership models such as cooperatives, shared equity, or neighborhood land trusts for the long-term preservation of those units and greater access to wealth for those residents? Really good
That's a really
question.
interesting question. I will tell you.
There's some innovation there, maybe, huh? Okay.
Percent. And I actually would like to highlight that comment because I do think that is exactly the kind of innovation that we need to be thinking about. I personally have done a little bit of learning about that model, right? And I remember walking away from it saying, who does the organization of this and how do they get paid? And there's a lot that goes into it, but I think it's worth it to figure it out. So it's ideas like that, looking at other models. You know, the state of Colorado does a lot with community land trusts, and that's something you don't even see in certain states. They don't even have a way to get there. So between the fact that technically, the LIHTC program can be used to create homeownership. It's complicated. I'd love to talk to you about it, but so there's a lot of opportunity out there for different models, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we at the state would love to hear about. And you know, you've got such a community here in Atlanta, right? Between the state agency, we're one of the largest producers of units in the country. You've got folks like Carmen's group, Columbia, working here, making these things happen, and the bankers that are all engaged. Again, now is the time more than ever to bring the crazy ideas and talk about them and collaborate, and maybe there is a path.
Because first they're crazy and then they become normal.
Exactly, yes.
Right. Okay. Question from the audience. And please give us your name and
Sure.
organization affiliation if there is one.
Hi, my name is Diana Stoyana. I'm with Integral. We're an affordable housing developer. There's a lot of talk about filling the gap. What is being done to prevent the gap? And Kim, you've touched briefly on BABA, Davis-Bacon, all of the requirements that are suffocating deals in their infancy. What federal or local policies are you seeing to prevent the gap? And are there creative ways, Dwayne, please chime in, through which that can be avoided? Because we are getting killed with fees. There's no waiver of permit fees. There's a ton of legal fees that come into these transactions. And then the procurement requirements are really impacting even a small deal to the tune of millions.
So repeat the question again, because you put a lot of editorial afterwards. The question might have been lost. So repeat the question.
What are the gap prevention measures or conversations or strategies that you're seeing?
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So to highlight again, it is on federal rules. Therefore, I do not have any influence over those rules changing. It is our duty to implement them. But still, to respond to your question, I think the biggest thing that the state can do is be a partner and understand what extra reviews and everything are being triggered and work on that in partnership with the developer. You know, when you come into a development first without federal funding, and then you've got a gap that comes up and you're trying to add federal funding, timelines change, your numbers change, everything. So one thing we're doing is we're looking at the resources we do have. We should be streamlining that as much as possible. You should be coming into your application already knowing you've got that federal fund piece so that you don't have surprises later down the line. So we're working really hard internally with our teams to understand what triggers what. You know, you've got PBVs, home funds, CDBG, all these things sometimes have different requirements. So it's an education piece on that side and being ready for it and making it happen on the front end instead of having to go back and do it again. That would be, I'd say, the biggest thing that we can do.
Okay. Anybody else want to respond to that?
Well, I think that's a interesting question, and I think it's an ongoing one, and I think it's one we're not going to answer fully in this room, because filling gaps even currently, you know, is challenging. So you look at how to fill a gap, you know, when the gap is increased. I think that's going to be challenging as well. But I kind of go back to what I said earlier about, you know, state and local governments playing a more active role in solving that gap, you know, because I think that gap's not going to be solved by one entity, whether it's the developer, whether it's DCA, or whether it's the bank. It's all of us working together to try to solve it.
Okay. Okay. Next question.
Jerry Miller, Capitol Hill Neighborhood Development Corporation. I guess this is mostly for Kim. Kim, given the penchant of this legislature and ruling party to reduce state income taxes or maybe eliminate them, have you looked at the effect that would have on the availability of LITC equity?
That's a great question. And I would say that it's nothing new for the state to be very aware of the effect of the state tax credit, that we are extremely fortunate in the state of Georgia to have not only have a state tax credit, but for it to be a 1-for-1 match. Y'all, the equity that is generated in the state, it's so fantastic. And we are one of, if not the only states that currently has one that good. So all of this to say, it's nothing new for the state to be very aware that we create that, right? That is the trade-off here. Rather than being funded directly by a tax dollar, we're generating those tax credits. So I would say it's always a concern to an extent. It's something we always want to be very aware of. What are we doing when we are making these awards, and keep that reasonable so that we're always ready to respond to it, not a new surprise.
Okay. Another question?
Hi, I'm Claire Ritchie. I'm an independent consultant. So you had raised the issue of needing more soft funding and the Housing Trust Fund having kind of limited dollars. Given the fact that that fund is non-lapsing and has like broader purposes than what it's used for, is there any consideration in this moment to try to beef that up a bit to try to address some of that gap?
Is your question about beefing up the amount of trust
Yeah,
funds?
about the appropriation, to try to seek a larger appropriation.
Sure. I'd say anytime that we get a source of funding that comes in, whether it's our annual home amount or we find out what our housing trust fund is, DCA is always going to meet and look at, because we do so much more than just multifamily housing out of DCA. We're obviously one of the higher profile programs, but there's a lot that's going on. So I would say we always look at what are the allowed uses of any funding that comes in, and we're going to look internally at what activity is going on and where could this make the most good. And bonus points if we can make more than one of our programs work together on it, right? So.
Here's another question from an online listener, again from Dr. Chuck Barlow, who asked this question: is workforce housing and transitional housing, are those top priorities? And if so, in what area? So I think really the question is, do you see examples where there are local governments maybe who are making workforce housing and transitional housing a top priority?
I think those are two really different types of approaches on transitional housing and workforce housing. As the panel mentioned before, Housing First sort of addresses permanent housing right from the start. And I don't want to misspeak on that, but so having housing that is permanent, incorporated, at least from Columbia's view, incorporated in a mixed income development is an approach that we take. I think when I look at Atlanta and what Atlanta's doing, certainly prioritizing getting people housed and making sure they're housed in permanent housing, because that's the focus. I haven't seen many. I do know that there are transitional housing programs that still exist in Atlanta that aren't funded through the traditional sources. I'm just personally from my history still supportive of models that address that level of housing need as well. But I used an example in Fort Worth, Texas, where a huge requirement was put in to serve PSH. So to answer the question, yes, I think communities are understanding the need to provide that type of housing and prioritizing it.
Any other thought?
Yeah, I can speak to the workforce housing standpoint. So at JP Morgan Chase, we actually have a platform that specifically finances workforce housing. And for us, the definition of workforce housing is, let's say if you look at Carmen's 100-unit development and we categorize it as workforce housing, what we would say is 50 of those units have to be rent restricted at a 15% discount to market rate rent. So that's the Chase definition of workforce housing. But to my knowledge, Chase is the only bank that actually has that platform that actually focuses on that product type.
Okay. Let me ask Carmen a quick question following up on that. So you mentioned earlier that your project in Texas actually has some part of it as partnership with the Salvation Army.
Yes.
Right. Are any of you seeing or are you aware of any other large organizations or corporations looking to do workforce housing as a partnership with nonprofit or for-profit developers? Beyond the bankers, any corporations looking to do that or support that kind of effort?
In that example that I gave, the Community Foundation was very involved, and the Community Foundation's support was also based on the permanent supportive housing requirement.
Okay.
So definitely from a business community standpoint, that funds that foundation, yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Question for the audience here. From the audience, excuse me.
Thank you. I'm Marty Collier. I'm a retired houser and community volunteer. And my question is around how an individual or family that is in need of housing can access some of these wonderful programs and find out if they might be eligible for one of the wonderful units that Columbia builds or for the Atlanta Land Trust property as a retired person, I spend more time walking around our neighborhoods and looking at things, and I do encounter people who are unhoused. And those of us, now we're going to be seeing more people with housing needs. How should we refer people to get in the pipeline? Is 211 still a good resource? Should we recommend people go to their local United Way? What's the best way for us as citizens who care about this problem to interface with people in need in our neighborhoods and on the streets?
Okay, great question. So how can we help our neighbors in need get into the system to find the support that they need to get housed?
Marty, hello, I remember you. I will say, as a practitioner, I could give you an answer, like you go to the COC, they have coordinated access points. Carol alluded to it earlier, you can't just show up at the door anymore. You have to go through these mechanisms. But I will tell you, just in real life, it's not that easy. So I would probably defer to someone else who can talk about what it feels like if you are really in that situation, or advising someone how to do it in a way that they actually get housing. And I'll speak to a particular development we're doing. I saw some of our partners in here earlier with the Decatur Housing Authority, where we have integrated supportive housing. We have 12 units set aside for referrals from DBHDD or the COC. We're still waiting on referrals. So how you do it is really the secret sauce that I think we got to figure out how to make that. Carol said it takes 6 months. And we got 12 units. So how do you do that better? I would love to hear the answer.
So I'm going to take the privilege of the moderator to ask Carol and Melanie, who deal with this on the ground level, what would your response be to?
Sorry, I had to stand up. So first thing, I agree. It's not a great process and it doesn't work perfectly. But coordinated, we did not make it up. So please have grace and don't shoot the messenger. Coordinated entry is a process we're required to follow. So it's one of those things that is a HUD regulation that we know maybe in theory and on paper is a best practice. In practical application, really not. There's a lot of pitfalls to coordinated entry. One being we just don't have enough resources to solve for everybody who's on that list. And a wait list is never a good way to do it, but we're required. So, we have to understand the needs of the community. Again, this goes back to what I was saying about local control and having your COC be there and be present. We're in the process of revamping coordinated entry and pulling in some of our prevention providers and looking at diversion as an opportunity. But it's just, there's no simple answer. So getting to know the resources that are in your area or that are close by, 211 is absolutely still available. That is United Way, just FYI. They run that, they keep a database. We all kind of feed our information into it. There's a ton of online options now too. Find Help, I think, is one of them where people are putting don't have access. Findhelp.com, I think, or .org. I don't know. Somebody
Probably
in here
.org.
knows. Probably .org. I know Cobb County uses it. A few of the others do. City of Atlanta has a resource center where you can call in and be referred for rental assistance and some other things. I know Starcy and Open Doors are heavily involved there. So sometimes it's Google search. Google's my best friend. But sometimes that's the best way to find what's close to you. They will show up, and especially geographically, you'll get pinged with what might be near you. But it takes a little bit of digging, and we do our best. But sending people directly to an office, as Carol said, is not always the best option. So making those phone calls to the touch points, the access points that exist, and trying to steward it that way so that people aren't wasting time sitting in a lobby where they're not going to get help is the best. I know it's a terrible answer, and I apologize. It's just, we're kind of, we're strapped by some of the regulations on that. So
It's not so much that it's a terrible answer, it's just that it's a difficult system that we've made hard for people in need to access. So the problem is the problem, not we are the problem. So we have to look at how we can change that. So we have to draw this portion of the program to a close so we can move toward getting you out of here on time. Bill prides himself and prides on us getting you out on time, and I want to maintain his track record. So with that, can we thank our panelists for Before I share any final thoughts, we have time for a few announcements. Anybody have announcements? Stand quickly, tell us your name, your announcement.
Morning, everyone. So my announcement is in relationship to the last question that was asked. I have been charged by the mayor to lead City of Atlanta's Housing Help Center. So to Ms. Marty answer your question, you do good to connect. We can connect after this, but for all, www.housinghelpcenter.com, 404-465-1829, 404-465-1829. We are charged by the mayor to support those looking to find housing and mortgage in the city. And then we can directly connect you to the COC folks for the chronic homeless side as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other announcements?
Good morning, everyone. This is Xingyuan Zheng from Georgia ACT, Georgia Advancing Communities Together. We will have our conference affordable housing on October 1st at Atlanta Metropolitan State College, and from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if you're interested in that, please come to me or go to our website, www.georgiaact.org. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any other announcements?
Hello, I'm Maria Saporta, and we have a nonprofit called Atlanta Way 2.0. On September 25th, we're having Atlanta Way Day, and it's going to be at the Tara Theater at, we'll start around 8:30, 9 o'clock. The focus will be on upward economic mobility, and we're going to be having some folks from Charlotte come and talk about how they went from 50th to 38th in upward economic mobility. Unfortunately, we went from 49th to 50th when Charlotte went to 38th. So they're going to tell us how they did it. And then we have a local response panel that's going to include Anna Roach, who succeeded Doug at the ARC. And also we have Frank Fernandez from the Community Foundation and Milton Little from United Way. And so we're going to try and galvanize a community to help them respond in the same way Charlotte did respond in addressing our pretty dismal showing for upward economic mobility. This is a regional number, so it's going to require regional effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Gentleman over here had an announcement.
Good afternoon. My name's Darcy Jarrett. I am with Policing Alternatives and Diversion. Today is actually National Suicide Prevention Awareness Day amid the month of National Suicide Prevention Month. And I train with Pat. I'm the training coordinator. We have a mental health awareness training that we would love to invite all of you to. And what we do in that training is we look at compassionate response. It's called Expanded Networks of Care. As you know, in the city of Atlanta, we have the option of 311 for community referrals to Policing Alternatives and Diversion. We are connected to coordinated entry, the city of Atlanta, and a number of different ways to journey with people who are experiencing mental health crisis, poverty, and these referrals can be made by any of us at any time. So come to a training. They're available through our website, monthly online trainings for community, or if you have a community, we'll come there and train you. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Okay, so as we close out, a few thoughts to kind of wrap up what our two sets of panels have suggested to us, that the policy changes at the federal level have some promise, but they're going to require a lot of innovation from us. They're going to require more trust and more funding with less restrictions. They're going to require more collaborations and partnerships. But as our first panelist said, they're also going to require us to not sit on the sidelines. We ourselves have to advocate as individuals and our organizations. We can't be passive. We can't be quiet. We have to volunteer to serve, and we have to give a damn. As Carol Collard said, there is an urgency. So with that, I remind everybody, if you would please sign Bill's card. We have it in the back again. If you would do that before you're on your way out. And thank you again for coming. And our next forum is when? December the 3rd. So we hope to see you back then. Thank you all very much.